Welcome, everyone. I'm Stephanie Armstrong, the Interim Executive Director of the Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce, and we are very excited to have you with us today. We have some really special guests, and I will leave it to our moderator to make the introductions. But before I do so, I just want to remind you that if you have questions for our speakers today, please go ahead and message them in the chat box. And everybody is muted and will remain muted during this conversation. But again, your questions should go through the chat box, and our moderator will take care of asking those. Without further ado, Geoff Green of the Santa Barbara City College Foundation and our board chair, I'll let you do the introductions.
Great, thank you so much, Stephanie. Again, I'll extend my welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce of the Santa Barbara region. We have today a much anticipated program. I know many of us in the business community, both for-profit and nonprofit, have been very much part of the conversation as Santa Barbara has brought on its first economic development manager. And so we're very happy today that we have that very individual, Mr. Jason Harris, with us, as well as Paul Casey, our city administrator. I'll give them a more formal introduction in a moment. But we do want to invite you to ask any questions. So as Stephanie said, please just use that chat function, and I'll be curating those questions when we are finished with our primary presentation. Our guests have an initial presentation of 15 to 20 minutes or so, where they're going to give an overview of where the city and the community stand with respect to our economic development situation. And I'm going to leave this off just by saying, this was already an exciting time for the city of Santa Barbara. Of course, we've had a long-running conversation in our city and our community about our downtown core and the health of its business sector. And in the wake of the Cosmont study that was done last year, there was a move to go ahead and start the creation of a new position. And that position is of Economic Development Manager. It is the first time the city's had a position like this. And so when our city administrator announced that, everyone watched very closely, I know, as that search was executed. And at the end of it, we were very happy to welcome Mr. Jason Harris. Jason is formerly the Economic Development Manager for the city of Santa Monica, which he did for nearly 8 years. And he arrived now in the midst of this new world, this brave new world in which we all are getting accustomed to. And that is, his first day was actually the 30th of March. So just 3 weeks back when we were already in a remote environment. So I cannot speak firsthand to what it means to start a new job as an Economic Development Manager in a remote environment. Few people can, but we'll let Jason speak a bit about that. And then, of course, we're going to have it led off with Paul Casey, someone most of us know. He is our city administrator. He's been serving the city of Santa Barbara for the past 23 years and has led not only the search here, but of course leads all of the day-to-day administration and management for our city. So I'll kick it off now and hand it to Paul Casey. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Geoff. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. First, I'll probably start off with the elephant in the room. This is brutal and unprecedented. I mean, I don't think any of us could have imagined something like shutting down the entire economy of the state of California and so many states across the country like we have. And the long-term ramifications of that, I think, are really unknown, because it's unknown how we're going forward. I just thought I would briefly share with you what the city is doing in response to this, because we kind of have a three-prong approach that we're having to face and deal with. The first is we are emergency responders, and so we need to organize the organization to immediately pivot and become first responders in this case. And so we did that. We did that quickly and immediately, and we did it a number of ways. Certainly you have your first responders of police and fire, and the strategy there was to make sure we had distinct work groups and spacing within those organizations such that if we do get an infection within the organization, it doesn't spread across so many people at once. And so that's been something we've been doing. We're still treating water, we're still treating wastewater. So we're doing those essential functions while still practicing safety issues with regards to our employees. So we've pivoted very quickly on that, and the organization has responded. I'm really proud of the way they've done that. We then immediately, realized that once we get to this public health crisis, we're going to have an economic crisis on our hands as well. And so I'm going to let Jason speak more about that. I'm glad he came on board when he did. It's a whole different world than what we imagined we were going into. But we all got to work together and try to figure out some strategies about how to go forward, and really look forward to working with the chamber on that as well. And then on top of all that, the city is facing a tremendous fiscal crisis. We are first responders. We have to keep working. We have to provide those services where our revenues are also getting hit dramatically. Our three big revenues are property tax, sales tax, and bed tax. Property tax is fairly stable. Sales tax is taking a substantial hit with the shutdown of the economy. And then bed tax is essentially non-existent. And as Kathy Tanega-Dykes knows, it's going to be a while for that industry to slowly recover, yet that industry is so crucial to so many different businesses in the South Coast that it's something we're all going to have to really focus and work about. So we're going to be at council today talking about the budget and the budget planning. We're looking in the ballpark of $15 million revenue loss for the remainder of this fiscal year and about a similar amount for next fiscal year. So that's going to be $30 million on a general fund of about $170 million. And so, you know, that's over 20–30% revenue loss. And so we're going to have to look at a wide variety of options, consider service reductions, use of reserves. Thankfully, we do have reserves. Look at labor agreements and see if there are concessions or furloughs that are part of that. But as a public entity, we have to negotiate with our labor unions for that. And so that's a process we have to go through. Federal relief is being debated in DC. I'm not counting on it, can't plan for it. Hopefully it comes out. All local government is getting hit really hard at the time that we're expected to step up and provide services as well. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of where we are in the city, but let's turn it over to Jason and introduce him. I'm really happy to have him on board. He's got great experience both in Santa Monica and Phoenix. He's got close to 20 years experience in economic development. He brings some new perspective and new ideas. And so I look forward to you all meeting with him and working with him in the future, but I'll turn it over to him at this point.
Good afternoon, everyone. I guess still the morning. Thank you for having myself and Paul join you all, and I look forward to meeting you all in person here in due course. I also want to say and express my gratitude for the businessmen and women in this community for making the investment in this community and bringing the vitality, amenities, and services to provide the needed resources for residents and visitors alike. I have a short PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to transition to share screen and then really speak to that, and then we can take questions. So this was Paul's slide that he just spoke of, and let's see if I'll just advance here. Apologies for the technological challenge. So just an overview of presentation. Again, short presentation, introduction. As you just heard, myself, Economic Development Manager, both served in the communities of Santa Monica as of recent, up until beginning of March. For 8 years, we had a number of business improvement organizations, oversaw a number of real estate assets, Santa Monica Pier, oversee the farmers markets, as well as a number of business promotion programs, a buy local campaign, etc. Prior to that, I was 13 years in the city of Phoenix, oversaw their downtown redevelopment efforts, and did some really substantial capital redevelopment, working with the state universities, community college districts to bring academic into the downtown core, as well as promote substantial housing investment. Prior to that, and earlier in my very beginning of my professional career, I served the United States Peace Corps in Costa Rica, and after my service there, I opened a restaurant and built a bed and breakfast, so I have kind of developer experience and small business restaurant experience. The topics I wanted to address today were really recognizing addressing the acute need of the business community and what city efforts we are engaged in providing relief and communication for business resources, working with a broad cross-section of organizations in that effort. We're preparing and positioning for recovery, and in looking forward to helping promote our business community and helping activations and events to really engage in business activity and really create the vibrancy that we need to get back into. And then concurrently, we're working on revitalization efforts and looking how we can engage our residents, help support the hospitality industry collectively, ultimately look to implement a wide range of revitalization initiatives I'll speak to, and then I'll end with the immediate next steps going forward. So currently we're in triage. This is really survival mode. We're acutely aware of the dramatic impacts that the business community, the affected workers are experiencing. On April 7th, the council approved a number of tax relief measures, deferring the hotel tax payment obligations. That's assisting the 69 hotel, motel lodging establishments throughout the city. We look to waive the parking and business improvement area assessment completely for the first quarter, and we'll be reevaluating that here shortly, as well as suspending the monthly and commuter parking. That's both of those programs affecting over 1,000 businesses and well over 1,000 employees and commuters in downtown. Concurrently, we've been very aggressive in pushing out the information related to the various programs of business assistance, principally the Federal CARE Act provisions, but there are also state benefits, especially unemployment insurance, as well as a number of local business organizations that have kind of smaller programs of assistance. So we've been aggressive social media, newsletter campaigns through our media outlet resources. We've recently established a business guidance resource. It's listed under the business tab on the city's main webpage. We're producing that and have produced that in Spanish. We're going to be distributing that hard copy, as well as providing resource connectivity to this information. Continued on in that effort and starting to hopefully position towards recovery is looking to engage businesses and positioning for reopening. That is will be interesting to understand, and it will be a fluid nature as to the governor's plan for reopening California's economy, the local county public health office in their directives, and we're going to be engaging the business community with getting an advisory committee task force established to kind of have that one-on-one dialogue established, so we can be attuned in helping both communicate, but then also be proactive in receiving feedback and recommendations on what the city can do to respond and assist in business reopening. I think we're acutely aware of the need to be sensitive and balanced in how we reopen the economy and support business activity, but being really attuned to helping promotion and marketing to let the state, the Western region know that we are open for business. I think Santa Barbara is really well positioned to be one of those locations that people will feel more comfortable engaging out in the public realm and engaging in commerce due to our proximity and open space, etc. We're also looking to facilitate, there's been a number of events that have been postponed or rescheduled, but being really strategic at targeting and bringing those activations back into our community to help drive business activity, that be it resident activity, being visitor activity, just to kind of buoy and really augment the loss of business that everyone has suffered for the first, kind of beginning of second quarter here in 2020. And then ultimately being really strategic about retention and attraction and helping support the business community, property ownership, and the recovery thereafter. Concurrently, we're also positioning and progressing on revitalization, which was the initiation of the creation of my position and the focus that this community's had for some time of helping kind of revitalize the downtown commercial business district, the downtown area, work collaboratively with all business organizations. And so that's really engaging all the partners and stakeholders in collaborative conversation, dialogue, to really bring creative ideas to the forefront and look to see where the city can improve our processes, streamline processes through be it development services, the permitting, and any other regulatory hurdles that businesses may be facing. We're engaging the Community Development Department to initiate and develop the revisions to the AUD ordinance. This is the housing program, and really focus on updating that ordinance to address the downtown core explicitly, the State Street corridor. We are also going to be exploring interest to outside of housing. Is there creative adaptive reuse? Obviously, we've had great success in the funk zone. How can that success of adaptive reuse be expanded throughout the city, up State Street, as it were, in the downtown core? Some really creative ideas of how the city can enable its right-of-way, be it its roadways or paseos, plazas, to really create activation and create new forms of engagement in the public realm. And I think that's really exciting as to how we can invite community organizations to be a part of the downtown experience. And then just lastly, just new partnerships and approaches, bringing really creative out-of-the-box thinking as to, all the organizations. This community is really blessed with having such creative capital in the community and such really engaged organizations. And so we should do our most to really engage and bring those parties to the forefront and see how we can collaboratively work together. So within kind of ending the presentation is really the high points of next steps of focus. It's going to be announced today in a council meeting that the mayor is organizing an advisory task force made up of a cross-section of businesses and business representatives throughout the community to, again, help the city in identifying, addressing the needs for reopening. How can the city assist? How can we communicate and coordinate the reopening of our economy and what the needs of the business community are? This is an ad hoc short-term function, but really critical that the city does everything we can to get Santa Barbara back and open for business. Concurrently, I'll be engaging with business outreach and coordination. Have been in the first 6 weeks of first few weeks here of starting that effort, but we'll be continuing that. And obviously, this opportunity to really address a broad cross-section of chamber members, 50 plus today, is that effort. But I look to engage with you all individually here in due course and over time. Obviously, the main focus is recovery and reopening. And so the two mentioned points are that effort, but also really open-minded as to what else we can be doing. So we're open for suggestions and input, and there will be information. We're setting up a direct email address. Feel free to reach out to me directly, jharris@santabarbaraca.gov, and or you can Google me through just Google, but happy to take phone calls and emails directly for taking input and ideas. And then just lastly, housing, I think, is really key. Adaptive reuse is going to be kind of run concurrent to that. We need the AUD ordinance. The planning division is laser focused on addressing that, and we'll be moving that initiative forward. And I think that's obviously a longer term, that's capital intensive, long-term planning, but we need to establish the regulations now to enable that. So with that, I think we're going to open it for conversation, and I'll end this screen sharing, and we'll go back to conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you, Paul, both for joining us today. So you've got a lot of welcome messages, Jason, so know that folks are glad to see you here with us. So I've been collecting some questions, and I want to start by asking, you had mentioned that the city is currently looking, and you're looking at ideas to attract people back to State Street, some of the advantages we may have over other communities once restrictions begin to be lifted. Can you speak specifically to what sorts of things might, maybe something you've seen work? Obviously, no one's seen a pandemic shutdown like this before, but things that might be useful strategies for us to consider in drawing people back down to our downtown core.
Yeah, no, I've got a lot of ideas. I don't have a specific plan. I'm actually really eager to engage the community at large, speaking with community organizations, businesses, a number of folks to kind of start to be that brainstorming effort. I really look and think it's important we engage residents principally, and because whatever is engaging the residents, that's a sustainable model. Bringing residents, if we haven't been a cross-section of residential engagement throughout the community coming in and feeling like State Street, the downtown, is part of their community, is really a part of their community living room, as it were. I think that's the foremost effort. If we create an inviting environment, an engaging environment with interesting activities, activations, entertainments, and so just to give you some potential ideas, and so community groups that might historically have their events at parks or in various facilities, I'd like to turn the downtown into an expansion of opportunity. And could we have musical school recitals happening in various plazas or in sections? Could we, the city actually had an event planned for May. It's going to be moved into September, kind of an open streets function where we close a section of State Street and dedicate that for non-vehicular, transportation uses, bikes, skateboards, just engage the public realm, the public right-of-way in a different way. And just creates some unique, interesting opportunities for the residents to enjoy the downtown. And if the residents are enjoying downtown, so will the visitors.
Thank you. You mentioned AUD, and I'm sure it's no secret to you that that's a hot topic for our community and has been for a number of years. Two questions. First of all, when you speak of revisions, could you give any detail to what kinds of revisions might be in consideration? And secondly, how do you view that as among the many priorities we all are now facing? Is that something that moves to the front of the line in this context?
Well, I think it is extremely important. There's obviously a lot of process associated to revising a substantial entitlement zoning issue such as that. That being said, it's a priority. I think it's known in your beginning comments. It's recognized that housing is a really critical element of having a successful downtown. Having housing in the core of downtown, we obviously have great adjacent neighborhoods, and those residents hopefully are engaged in the downtown environment. But it is both a way to bring new investment. It's a way to bring a new user group of residential activity into the downtown and ultimately support downtown businesses. That being said, one is the ordinance currently really doesn't address the State Street, so that's a principal function that needs to be evaluated and addressed. And then secondarily, I think evaluating the entitlement and the economics associated, is it sufficient as it's currently programmed to induce property owners who may not necessarily be motivated to look to modify their properties or see their properties develop? Is there enough inducement? And then just thirdly, I'll put out there, the city is a property owner in downtown, and having that evaluation of surface parking lots that they could be developed, maintain the public parking when they are developed into housing, but those could also be put into the mix. So I think there's a wide range of opportunities beyond just the AUD program that we can start to explore. And then just along those lines, as we're evaluating that, adaptive reuse of properties. Are there limitations in the zoning or the building code that's prohibiting? Obviously, we do have to address ADA and some other legal requirements, but are there creative ways through the regulatory mechanisms that we can facilitate additional uses or additional investment?
Hey, Geoff, it's Paul Casey. If I could just chime in on that. At Council today, George Buell and Renee Brooke are going to present an expedited timeline at looking at AUD amendments for the downtown core. So if anyone on the line is interested in that, shoot Council an email or call us in at the meeting or follow that. But we're going to say, we can kind of peel out that downtown section, which I think there's a lot of unanimity for doing, and so let's hurry up and do it. Because I think property owners need to know kind of what are their options coming out of this. If retail is really slow to recover and they're interested in housing, I think they're going to jump at housing more if they understand what the parameters are and what the process is. So we're going to come out today and recommend that let's just push it really hard and get it done by September. And so that for Santa Barbara is a pretty expedited process, but we're going to engage Council's interest in doing that today. And I hope they'll be responsive and interested in doing that.
In a related matter, something that's been a part of our public conversation for a few years now, it's connected to AUD, but not exclusively, is the relative benefits, the trade-offs with respect to development in the downtown core of housing, denser apartment, rental housing in particular, for local residents and workers, versus development of hotels and other visitor services. Can you, Jason, maybe speak broadly in your experience, and as you've seen this in a number of cities, what kinds of considerations go into finding that right balance? Because certainly that's something we've been struggling with in Santa Barbara.
Sure. Well, it's going to fall as much to both what is available under the zoning regulations to actually be built by right as one principal tool. Secondarily, the economics ultimately drive to a certain extent the decision factors that property owners and investors will evaluate in return on capital and the risk. And, thirdly, I would just balance the need for diversification. We have a number of lodging businesses and a fair number of lodging rooms. And so just bring into balance, what is the market capacity for the amount of lodging capacity. I know, as all things, there's average daily room rates driven by, economics of demand and price points, et cetera. And so I just want to be thoughtful collectively in our efforts, and to a certain extent, that earlier reference point I made of just evaluating the economics of the AED program today, is that enough inducement based upon the program criteria to kind of balance the opportunities?
Great, thank you. So this is an issue that's also been with us for a long time, which is just the general relationship between business owners and developers and the city and all of our various permitting processes. Obviously, there's long been a pressure to try to make those more streamlined, to ask the city to serve as more of a partner to folks developing either properties or businesses within those properties, or both. And in this moment, obviously, the speed becomes a critical issue, because getting back to work and getting the economy restarted after something of this catastrophic nature is on another level. What are your thoughts on that piece of it, and how the city might be a partner? What permitting processes might be amended or even temporarily suspended in order to get people back to work, get projects back online? And Jason, specifically to you, maybe whether your position and your specific role being new to our city is something that could serve as a partner. I mean, would you be available to developers early on in their projects to help make sure that those permitting processes are navigated in the best way possible, rather than what has often been the experience that people are most upset about, which is that after they've gone through a couple of years of processes, they run into a wall with something that they feel could have been dealt with or navigated earlier upstream?
Certainly. So, broad set of issues to unpack there. I think a couple of things just to highlight. One, the city has made a number of efforts to help begin to expedite and facilitate, permitting review process. So the Accelerate program, the creation of that, the establishment of the business liaison. And so I'm just an additional tool to kind of augment those existing programs. I'll also be kind of a facilitator to help the community development department and have outside perspective to evaluate their process improvements that they're currently underway of evaluating, bringing some, kind of fresh perspective or new thinking. I think it's also important, though, that I'm also a bit of a realist in helping communicate to potential investors, businesses, and property owners as to some of the realities, because we do have some existing realities within our zoning code and ordinances that just need to be understood and incorporated in business timeline and planning. And so, if we have a very large, landmark historic district that needs to be recognized, that I don't think it's necessarily going to go away. And I think we should be realistic that, how much of process related to any permitting and zoning can be streamlined. These are regulatory requirements, be it through National Building Code for the building permit requirements. These are life safety conditions that have to be met for having safe and sound structures. Federal laws in relation to Americans with Disability Act that have to be addressed. And these ultimately safeguard not only occupants within these properties that are being built, it safeguards the property owners and the investors, because if they ultimately are sued over ADA accessibility, if they weren't meeting these minimum requirements, then that's ultimately a contingent liability they carry, in the books kind of going forward. So I think it's a balancing act, but the city is extremely focused in looking to improve and enhance the processes collectively, and there's a number. And so I'm going to be, in addition, to help evaluate and advocate. I'll also be an advocate for the business community and ultimately property owners who haven't necessarily had a voice. The business community is well organized, and there's business organizations for various sectors, and hospitality and lodging businesses and various business organizations such as the Chamber. But I have not encountered a property owner association or organization that has a collective voice. And so I'm actually going to be meeting later this week with a group of property owners to start that conversation and begin that dialogue. And so I hope to be an advocate on behalf of their interest and be a point of influence and communication into this city process.
Right. Thank you. And Paul, maybe this for you with the longer time horizon and sort of experience in the city of Santa Barbara. What are some specific thoughts, and I know you're having lots of them, about what kind of things might be adjusted for the city to speed up the return to work when it does happen? Are there, I mean, as you think through all the systems in place to protect life, safety, environment, et cetera, what are the things that you believe could be done differently by the city overall as we work to, once the orders begin to get lifted, the stay-at-home orders, what could be done there to speed that up? And I'm thinking big picture now. We have a few different questions about this.
Yeah, that people are starting to talk about that, and I get it. And I gotta say, nothing immediately comes to mind, because as Jason mentions, and some are building code related or federal law related that we just don't have a lot of flexibility with. Do we want to loosen up sign enforcement for a year? That's something we could do. I think businesses would be very interested in that. Based on my experience here, will we get blown back from others who say we're sacrificing what makes Santa Barbara special by doing that? So I think we need to have a little bit of a conversation about that before loosening up some of those kind of quality of life initiatives that we've had over the years adopted by council that have been supported. I tread a little carefully, because sometimes you don't realize kind of what kind of blowback you might have in that regard. I will say I've been impressed with the building and safety folks and planning folks keeping operations going, immediately moving to electronic plan submittal. You'll see that other counties were not issuing permits or doing permit reviews, but we've never stopped. It certainly was an adjustment for a time period. We're one of the first to get our design review boards up and running through Zoom type meetings like this, and those have been pretty successful. We got planning commission kind of geared up and ready to go. And so we're trying to get kind of those processes continue to function and move forward. Open to suggestions though. If there are things that you all think that we should, like you said, loosen up for a year or two, send them our way. Let's look at them. Absolutely. Very open to those types of suggestions.
Thank you. Now, Jason, you mentioned, and Paul certainly has previously mentioned that the city is also a property owner. And there are certain properties, iconic properties, where businesses lease from the city itself or components, departments of the city. Can you speak a bit about what might be being considered in the way of rent for those business owners in there? I know we've already talked about the tax deferrals to ease the blow of the current economic shutdown crisis, but what else might be possible with respect to the city? And I'm speaking now as sort of city as landlord to work with your tenants in some of those businesses out at the waterfront or elsewhere.
Yes, so it's principally the waterfront where we have the commercial business interests in the city, and city in a proprietary role as a landlord does have to evaluate balancing the needs of those businesses as well as the city's needs. But I've oversaw the Santa Monica Pier, and we had 27 large commercial business operations, and so I'm an available resource to Mike, the waterfront director, and his team as needed. And so I think we will be balancing, because we want to be both a sensitive landlord and recognize the needs of the tenants, and then also one fundamental question I'm sure many landlords have been asking their tenants of, what type of insurance, business interruption insurance do they may have, and what resources in that regard are potentially, liability kind of resources. But no, I think, the city should be a representative, a good representative of commercial property ownership representation. Our holdings, are relatively limited in that context, but I think we should be, doing what we can to support our businesses in that regard.
Right. And actually, further on that point, you just mentioned engaging some of the property owners in downtown Santa Barbara. What about engagement with the Association of Realtors? As you may know, we have a really well-organized and large group of organized realtors, professionals in the realty world. When you talk about questions around property rights, anything that might have to do with city policy, are you planning to engage the Realtor Association as well?
Most definitely, and there's on this mayor's advisory task force, there is a representative of that organization that will be on that panel, and then obviously I'll be establishing personal working relationships as well. So not necessarily relying formally and solely on the task force, and just to reiterate Paul's broad openness, we're available collectively and independently to any formalized, organized process and efforts such as, and this is very valuable and helpful. So thank you for Stephanie and you, Geoff, for moderating and facilitating, but we're also available to make ourselves available to take input and feedback and have conversations. So I welcome that.
Right. Now, coming from Santa Monica, also a multilingual community, as you know, we are here as well, specifically bilingual, Spanish, English primarily. Wondering what your thoughts are on how to make sure that that language barrier for some is not a barrier to access to the city, and of course to the economic development questions that involve everyone.
Certainly. So, the forefront of the presentation, I had the one slide about our communications efforts. We produced a website directory of assistance programs. We've converted that into a hard copy document, so we have that available. It's been translated to Spanish. I'm engaging the Hispanic Chamber. The chair of that organization is going to be on the task force. So we are attuned and attentive, and we'll be implementing an additional outreach effort to do some direct engagement to Hispanic businesses that may not necessarily be formally plugged into these current networks, as it were, or maybe even aware of the resources that are online. So we kind of have a variety of concurrent efforts underway to address those needs and concerns.
All right, someone asked, so I have to ask it. Are you yourself a Spanish speaker, Jason?
Sí, yes, I am.
Great. Another. Let me just change tacks here for a moment. So there's a couple of specific questions coming in. One of them is on the FAR approach used in Santa Monica that you're obviously familiar with, and what you think the possibilities might be for Santa Barbara.
I wouldn't venture to offer any suggestions. Height density is really based on specific local needs, and obviously that's both contentious as far as a collective community concern and issue. It's also driven to a certain extent based upon economics and sense of place. So I think that's one really where I would be suggesting that we look to the current program, look to the development that has occurred under the current program, and evaluate what modifications can be made to produce the type of housing that we're wanting, both in size and price point. Scale obviously is a factor in that formula because it does create obviously a development pro forma as far as cost and then revenue. So it all comes together, but I wouldn't make any suggestions just be an analytical support to help think through kind of that complex matrix, as it were, of issues to be evaluated.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, I know we're going to lose you to council business here before too long. One question that I'll toss to you first, which is, as you think through reopening the city for business, what about the safety side of things? What measures and accommodations do you believe we're going to need to be ready for and look at as we gradually bring people back out onto our public streets and into businesses and such?
What do you think you mean by safety stuff, Jeff?
The question looks like it's regarding use of masks, social distancing, all the things we're currently in the midst of learning. How do we use those protocols in the context of a reopening of business?
Yeah, great question. So just so people understand how it kind of rolls out. So the governor at the state of California is kind of the largest governmental authority who's kind of stepped into this field with his stay-at-home order. And so he needs to be the first one to act on loosening up, and we'll need to see what kind of guidance they provide. The county public health officer then needs to look at their order and modify that either to be in sync with what the governor is saying, or they can be more restrictive if they choose to be. So we need to kind of get the guidance and direction. What I am observing, because I look at this closely, as I'm sure a lot of you do, is I think we're going to have a gradual reopening. I think they are going to eventually, I don't know what the timing, if I were to guess, I would guess mid-May, if you just kind of look at reading the tea leaves of what they're talking about. Allowing stores to start reopening, still requiring the social distancing, probably trying to limit the amount of people within retail stores and within workplaces that can practice the social distancing. I don't know what the mask criteria will be. The mask criteria now is for any place where you don't think you're going to be able to practice social distancing, wear a mask, like a grocery store or a pharmacy. So I don't know if they're going to go a mask requirement for being out in public, or more of a mask requirement when you're in kind of those types of places. So I see that opening first. Restaurants, you see what other countries or other areas are doing on restaurants, and that's like trying to go down to half capacity of what they're allowed so that the tables are spaced. So I hope they kind of get some place to get some restaurants back and open, because I know they're really, really struggling being closed, except for those that can do takeout. I think bars and movie theaters and Libero and Arlington and those kind of larger gatherings are later. And I don't know when they get that. We all watch kind of the conversation about sporting events, and I think you look at sporting events, and for us, you think performing arts. And so I don't know where or how they're gonna manage that. It's hard, and we're Americans. We're sucking it up and we're doing it now, but at some point we want our freedom back to be able to grow and prosper. So it's a tricky one.
Certainly. Thank you. Do you have anything you'd like to share before you have to leave the call, Paul? I want to make sure you have an opportunity to share anything else, and we'll continue on for a few more minutes with Jason.
Perfect. Thank you. No, I appreciate the forum. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you to members of the chamber. Great turnout on the call. Really appreciate it. It has to be a collaborative effort. Just looking for the city to kind of do it all isn't going to work, but us just looking for you to do it all isn't going to work. We all got to do this together. And so let's be creative. Let's facilitate those ideas and conversations. Let's work with the council so that they can take actions that kind of benefit all of us. This is the most challenging time I've seen in my 30 years of professional career in public service. And so I'm sure it is for all of you as well. And so we're going to be better if we're pulling in the same direction. And so I really encourage us to keep that collaboration going and pull together and find ways out of this. Thanks very much for having me on. I do have to step off.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Paul Casey, City Administrator, on to council business. Jason, thank you for spending some time with us here today. We have a few more questions, so if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and ask these. The first is actually around homelessness, and although you may be newer to our community, I'm sure you're not new to the challenge of homelessness in a community, a coastal community like Santa Monica, certainly. Do you have a perspective on, in this moment, obviously there's an additional challenge on the public health side for folks that don't have regular shelter. But in a bigger picture, do you have a perspective on strategies that have worked to help people find shelter, to avoid some of the things that happen between large homeless populations and visitors and local residents when they're in a downtown core? Could you give us maybe an overall perspective of how you approach that situation?
Yeah, no, that's a great broad question. I was actually on a call earlier this morning with the police department, our human services staff to discussing this exact issue. And it was in context to this larger issue, starting to think about reopening and also the balance of how we're addressing the homelessness issue currently, which is with a fair degree of current restraint with the pandemic, be it from the CDC and really at a national state level. Local agencies, jurisdictions have been directed to not aggressively enforce homeless encampments and disbursements if they're being maintained in a generally as close to a health and safe condition as possible. And as extreme as these conditions appear, when our police have and ambassadors have interacted and have done inspections, it's been fortunate to find that they have had hand sanitizer. They are keeping some level of with the ability, recognizing they're living in the open environment. That being said, I think as we transition into recovery, we are starting to establish a plan of action to address the issues that we have seen kind of grow and become more pronounced, especially when there's an absence of people in the public realm. Just the most of the public heads in the realm are those experiencing homelessness, and so it just becomes that more visible, as it were. And so obviously addressing the clean aspect initially, addressing safety, and then ultimately, coming forward with service. Homelessness is a challenging issue because one, you cannot police your way out of it. Homelessness in itself is not a crime. If there are civil infractions or criminal infractions, those can be enforced. But I think it needs to be a balanced effort. And if there is not homeless housing to relocate people to, then you're just moving the problem somewhere else. And in the location of like Santa Barbara, we're somewhat isolated in the context that other than just adjacent nearby communities, really they're just being moved, maybe more into locations where they can't be visibly seen. And so I think there are strategies, and I look to engage, those organizations, individuals involved in the homeless issue of looking at best practice. It's a very costly endeavor to address the needs of homelessness. But that being said, national best practices is that if you leave it unaddressed, the actual cost to the community collectively, specifically cities who are kind of on the front line of being impacted, the cost actually grows, because then you're looking at more social service needs, you're looking at healthcare needs and police needs, et cetera, that start to really exponentially increase over time. And so there are various tactics that can be made, and I look to learn of what has been shown to be effective here and what maybe hasn't been tried. Repatriation, connecting people with their families, has been shown to be effective. Addressing sometimes the homeless community gravitates around an individual, and so intersecting that kind of that individual can sometimes disperse collectives that form. So there's a variety of tactics. I also look here in due course to establish some business resource information. So the business community, the employees working for the businesses have some really best practice of how to interface with the homeless population, how to communicate to their customers about the issue. And so I think there's some best practice out there that I can bring forward and share as to. It's also a communication of raising the awareness, because taking at a face value, it just says, oh, make it go away. It is not that easy, and it's really not. That's not practical. It's a very comprehensive and complex effort that needs to be conducted to make a dent and move the needle. And it takes regional partnership, and it takes a substantive amount of resources. And governmental resources are equally impacted with the impacts to revenues, to businesses and business activity in total. So we're going into a challenging time were governmental resources. And I would just put it out there that, another effective tool that has been shown in the LA area has been philanthropic efforts in making a really substantive effort to increase philanthropic recognition, giving, and engagement. And that involves, a cross section, not just businesses, nonprofits, and the residents at large of donating to organizations that provide service, volunteering to organizations that provide service, and then advocacy. And those collective efforts, kind of across the board, can move the needle. So I look to get engaged in this, and it is a substantive issue into the quality of life for the community. But we also need to address it with compassion and care, and recognizing these are people experiencing homelessness, and I think we should be thoughtful of making broad labels of just homelessness. There are people experiencing homelessness. And by the way, this economic crisis is going to drive the numbers up. There is no doubt about it. And I'm sure it will statistically bear. And that, maybe first seeing people living in their vehicles that, become evicted. A lot of people in America live paycheck to paycheck and do not have any substantive fallback and kind of cash reserves. And so I think, again, we just address this with compassion, but, obviously we're sensitive to the needs of the community from a quality of life and obviously a safety standpoint. So it's concurrent in efforts, and I look to hopefully be a part of finding some solutions that make a difference here.
Right. Thank you, Jason. Well, we're approaching the end of our time with you. I know I have one more question I'd like to ask, and then give you the opportunity to say any closing remarks, how to reach you, etc. But the question is, obviously, the Cosmont study, which was referenced earlier, is the most recent in a series of studies the city has done to try to figure out, this is of course before the COVID-19 pandemic, what needed to be done to revitalize and strengthen the business community in downtown and the general health of our downtown core. And wondering if it's clear to you at this point that you have a significant role in that implementation. Obviously, anything you can share about what you and our city administrator have discussed around those recommendations and how your new role will help us to move forward on some or all of them.
Yeah, no, great question. I would just kind of recap and review a lot of the points that we've been discussing, a lot of the questions that have been raised. And I'll just kind of hit just off of memory that one, I'll be an advocate for a lot of organizations and individuals in helping, make change within the organization, specifically within the development processes that may impede capital investment, but also look to be a partner and a collaborator with a lot of organizations and really kind of be an area of new creativity to express some questions and ideas as to how we can best engage the community as a whole to think creatively of how to engage downtown, and think of it as our living room, and how best to bring new innovative uses and activations to downtown. And I need to learn. I'm still getting my feet wet of understanding what have been the issues, where are the opportunities, but just out of the box thinking. Have we had community-wide or community business district wide sidewalk sales? Have we ever looked at community-wide outdoor dining, where it's more of a collective, various pop-up events, reorienting and reusing public right-of-way in different ways? So I think there's just a lot of creative ideas that can be brought to bear to envision activations that aren't capital intensive and don't take substantial long-term planning. And again, I'm buoyed with optimism that the city has begun these initiatives. The Long Leash event, activating the underpass on State Street. We had additional efforts underway to have more of those activations. I think those are great. I look to expand that throughout State Street in different creative ways. So it's really, the city is an enabler, a facilitator, but I also would, remind us all that the city isn't going to be doing this alone and isn't going to be the sole initiator. And so I think we just put the question out there for the collective greater community as to, what creative ideas have people always wanted to try. And I'm all about experimentation and pilots and pop-ups. And so let's try it. Let's see what works. it doesn't work, okay, we'll move on to the next idea. And you know, excited to engage the community and support our business community at the same time.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. Just in closing, any final words and/or ways that you'd like people to know best ways to reach you, to reach out, opportunities to connect?
Yeah, most definitely. So first off, gratitude to all of you for joining. Thank you for Stephanie and Geoff for facilitating this. Look forward to meeting with you all here in due course. And in person, I think we're all, you know, in need of having that personal, individual, physical connection here in due time. So I look for those opportunities to do so. Contact information, apologies, I didn't have a slide with that on there. So it's jharris at santabarbaraca.gov. You can email me direct. I can make my phone number available as well. We're also going to be establishing, you know, a direct kind of email to the city in relation to the COVID-19 task force, and so that will be disseminated as well. And so again, just additional ways to gather feedback and input as we look to move out of survival and to reopening and recovery here very shortly.
Well, thank you so much. Again, a big thank you to Jason Harris, our new Economic Development Manager for the City of Santa Barbara, also to Paul Casey, our City Administrator. Thank you to all of you for your questions and for joining us today. And I'll toss this back to Stephanie to tell you that we'll record it and put it up on our website soon for any friends or colleagues that didn't get a chance to join us in person today. Stephanie?
You're mute.
I think you're muted, Stephanie.
I do this every time. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Jason, for being here, and welcome to the community. And Geoff, thank you for moderating the discussion today. And I will be putting this on online, and you'll also receive it in our email blast tomorrow. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys for our next speakers. And thank you all again.